We are so excited to be joined by Donna, who is an apology expert, and we're excited to dig into this conversation with her. Donna, would you tell
who can't use one of those in their lives, right?
Yeah, an apology expert, right? I feel like we should all have one on standby. So, Donna, would you introduce yourself to the podcast?
Sure. So my name is Donna Moriarty, and I'm a writer, editor, and I'm author of the book, Not Just Words, How a Good Apology Makes You Braver, Bolder, and Better at Life. And I believe that firmly. I have pretty much my writing career spans like 30 years, maybe it's 35 by now, working with nonprofits, higher education, both in the corporate sector as well as a freelancer. As a freelancer, I've written short fiction, nonfiction, book reviews, a prize-winning one-act play.
Wow.
My work has been in national magazines, newspapers, and blogs. In 2015, I founded my own company, Silversmith Writing and Editing, and I work with clients to help them discover what is unique and beautiful and brilliant about their work and to polish it to a high luster. I have a bachelor's in social psychology and a master of public health in behavioral science and health promotion. So that's sort of a little bit of the psychology piece that kind of led to my writing this book. Not Just Words is my first book, and I'm working on a memoir currently. And my husband and I have 3 grown children, and we live just outside of New York City with our dachshund, Demi.
I love that you brought up to your psychology background. That makes a ton of sense after reading the book. You can definitely see that throughout the book. And I just want to give a heartfelt positive review for Donna's book. It's really fantastic. It's an easy read, but also super, super helpful. So if this is an area you would like to dive into more, would highly recommend you pick up a copy, and we'll tell you how to do that at the end. Donna, what really led you to kind of dig into the topic and write the book?
Really great question, Beth. I discovered that I was fascinated with apologies, with what I consider to be the art of the apology, when I was hired onto a team and we were assigned to read Gary Chapman's book. You know, he wrote The 5 Love Languages. He has also written The 5 Languages of Apology. And it just opened up a whole world of how people respond to an apology. But I felt like there was something missing in terms of how do you do this, especially if you don't want to do this or you don't believe it. I mean, I met people who said, I never apologize. And they said it like they were proud.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, I consider apology both an art and a science. It's like the science of the emotions, but it's also a tool, and it's a tool for making things right with the people who matter. And those people can be friends or neighbors or coworkers. They can even be strangers, because if you're having an interaction with a stranger and it's not going well because of something that you've done or for whatever reason, it's not going to get better by not having the skill. So I really feel like it's applicable in pretty much nearly every interaction with humans.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's part of what makes the show great. And Donna is a fan of the show for our listeners, so she knows the show well.
That helps.
I think part of what makes the apologies stand out so much on the show is because we don't see them highlighted. Like, this is an incredibly unusual thread to have woven through something that we're watching play out on TV, especially in the leadership space, because I think of exactly what you were just saying. Like, it isn't something that a lot of people want to do or have been encouraged to do, and many of them actively avoid it.
Right.
So I'm curious, did your research uncover at all? What's the root of that? Why do people avoid it? Is it a skill issue? Is it what's the core?
I think it starts with people just feel so much shame and embarrassment when they realize they've done something wrong. You know, one of the examples that I give in the book is if you sit on Aunt Millie's chair and it breaks, her antique chair, and it breaks beneath you, you didn't mean to do it, but the damage is done, and you have to do something about that. And I think it goes down to people just really feeling ashamed. And I think people hate feeling ashamed more than they hate feeling almost anything. And so they will go out of their way to sort of avoid first admitting that they've done anything wrong, and then having to apologize means having to face the person that you've harmed. And it's not easy, but sometimes the avoidance of that is a lot harder, or the consequences are a lot more long lasting.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's right. That feels super true to me too, the shame connection. Yeah.
Brene Brown would agree.
I think so too.
That she's made. So Donna, I have, I've definitely dated myself a few times so far on the podcast, but I immediately thought of when we nailed down the details for you to be on the show and to talk about apologies. I went back to my old Happy days when Fonzie had to say he was sorry. And I don't know if you remember that, but he just couldn't. He's like, I'm
Couldn't do it. Like, yeah.
Right.
It's just literally choking on the words as they come out. And so I'm curious if you have, maybe there's somebody listening who says, every time I apologize, I go in with the best intentions, but I screw it up. And I just don't know. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And I think that there are a lot of people who like a prescriptive method of things, right? Like I've actually heard leaders say this, just tell me the 3 things I need to do and I will do them. Give me the list.
Yeah.
But I don't want to figure it out. I don't want to know. I want somebody else to tell me that they've done the research and that it works. Like, just tell me what to do. So if you have somebody who's sitting in front of you, and it's really, it's both extremes, but do you have like a good prescription or good qualities of a good apology? And then also the flip side of that is what pitfalls to avoid when apologizing. Because one of the things, and maybe you'll talk about this, but one of the things I say to people all the time is if you're apologizing, you can't say I'm sorry, but that's not an apology. No but in apology.
Right. Yep. There are, I should have flagged the page in the book, but I do have do's and don'ts of good apology, and I'll try to remember some of them. But basically, it is a 4-step method that I call it. It's not really a method, but honestly, apologies tend to follow this series of steps that we make. So I call it 1, admit it, 2, express it, 3, fix it, and 4, change it. So I'm going to explain what that means. So admitting it actually is admitting it to ourselves. I've screwed up. We have to start by saying that to ourselves, because without that, we're in denial already, and we're not going to get anywhere near an apology if we haven't done anything wrong. So admitting it to ourselves first is the first step. And the example that I pulled from the show is when Keely says to Rebecca, you have to tidy up your mess. That's that moment. Well, Rebecca has to go through a few phases before she's actually ready to do it. But at the moment when she finally recognizes it to herself, that's the beginning. Then the next very important step is to express it, and it's use your words. The words are, I'm sorry. There are other words, lots of other words. And, you have to say what you feel comfortable saying. But, so I never meant to hurt you. You didn't deserve that. I wish I could take back what I said. Sorry, I didn't really think this through. What is it? Rebecca says something. She said, I lost myself for a minute. I thought that was so
so good.
So you're facing the person, and it's best not done by text or by email if you can avoid it. A letter is acceptable.
I think we may have said that.
Yeah.
But that face-to-face is certainly the hardest, and it is the gold standard, if you will. But it really is like a text is terrible, or a voice message, but honestly, one of those is better than not doing it at all. Step 3, fix it, is, let me make this right. And sometimes that is part of the conversation with the person you're apologizing to. What can I do to make this up to you? Or let me write you a check for that thing I broke. Or, when Rebecca is apologizing to Higgins for firing him, she's making it right by hiring him back, and even by going to his house and watching him play the bass with his little
mustache
with the cheesy stash.
Yeah.
Oh man, I love Higgins. So something has to be done to make it right. So that, the paying for the damage done, or fixing whatever you can, or, whatever mess you made. And when a leader is making that thing right, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And they're usually, I wouldn't say a grand gesture, but the right gesture. So but it's finding out what's really going to make it right with the other person, not so much what we think. Like there's a kind of classic example of the guy who does something terrible, brings home flowers to his wife and she throws them in the trash because there was no apology coming first. She may be ready for the flowers later, but the flowers don't take the place of the sincere recognition. I did something to hurt you. I'm sorry. Let me make it right.
Yeah.
And then the last step is to change it, which means in some way or form, make sure that it doesn't happen again. And it's not just saying this won't happen again, but I have said that. I had to say that a couple of times in the workplace where I screwed up. And I said it won't happen again, and it didn't. And because I don't want to go through that more than once.
Yeah.
But to take steps to have it not happen again. And so in a crisis communication situation where, God forbid, lives were lost or damage was done, the leader is responsible for making sure the systems get put into place so that this thing doesn't happen again. You put in more safety measures, whatever it might be, but you have to take that responsibility. I mean, this is on a leadership level, there's a lot of taking of responsibility, and it is so crucial. It's crucial on an individual level, but it's also crucial on that level where you're talking about many lives, maybe many jobs, lots of airtime, lots of media coverage, perhaps, or social media. You're getting judged in the court of public opinion when a mistake happens on a really high level like that. But that's where true leadership can emerge.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So since you're shifted it to the leadership side, I'd love to dig in a little bit because so many of our listeners are leaders and working in that space and, really digging in to try to be the best leaders that they can. Is there anything specific you would encourage leaders to do differently when it comes to apologies?
Yeah, it's most instructive to learn from bad ones
because like so many things in life,
immediately how bad and how it makes you feel, even if you're not on the receiving end. So a bad apology usually begins when someone's just trying to avoid that responsibility, that admitting it to oneself. They're denying responsibility, which is already, if you could read this, let's go back a couple of years. Remember on the United Airlines flight when the marshals came and dragged the doctor off the plane who refused to give up his seat? And the CEO of United Airlines first blamed the victim, then apologized for the inconvenience and for the overbooking of the flight. He never apologized to the man who was literally bloodied on the way out of the plane. And he was a doctor who was seeing patients. It was so egregious. He just kept building one mistake on top of another by avoiding responsibility. And I'm telling you, he was trashed in media and social media. People certainly noticed, and they certainly had their opinions about that. So let's look at the flip side. A leader who's not afraid to take this responsibility right from the get-go for a problem that her team or her organization has had a role in. First of all, she's just more in control. She's controlling the narrative. That admission, it's like, this was wrong. This was a mistake. We're going to take care of this. She comes across as trustworthy. Her integrity is very clear. She's kind of admitting that she's human, which makes people sort of settle down right away and they feel like they're more relatable. It sucks all the defensiveness out of the person who's on the listening end. And people soften their judgments. They're on her side now. And there's tremendous power in being willing to take those steps. It's like maybe a moment of that white hot spotlight. And after that, you've got your team behind you, you've got the public behind you. And, at whatever level this has to happen, it just really goes better if someone can learn this skill. And, everybody knows how. From the time you were in the sandbox, and someone said to you, you can't take that toy away. Say you're sorry for throwing sand in his face. We all know how to do it. And we actually know how to recognize it too. The only question is just having the courage, really, and the willingness to just take those extra steps and make that apology.
And so on that piece, Donna, because I think we've probably, I'm going to make an assumption here, but I think probably all three of us in our lifetimes have worked for leaders who just, not going to happen.
Right.
It just, right. They're just, So what is it in all the work that you've done? What is it that you think that keeps people? Because maybe somebody's listening to this, right? And they're like, gosh, I suck at apologizing, and they're hopefully drilling down a little bit to say, well, I wonder why that is, or I just don't apologize. And I know some people who would say, well, I don't apologize because I'm always right.
Yeah.
I mean, even when things go poorly, they still have this, what I would call somewhat delusional idea that like they're still right. But if we're just talking about somebody who just says, gosh, I just, as I'm taking stock of my relationships or, issues that I've had, I just don't apologize. So what stands in the way, do you think, for people who just kind of, if we go back to the sandbox, that just kind of stand in the sandbox and like both feet in and like, nope, not doing it.
Yeah. What stands in the way? I think I think that's the $1 million question. Because I wrote this book for people who refuse to apologize, won't apologize, are proud of not apologizing. It turns out the people who are buying this book are the people who have to deal with those people.
That feels right.
Oh,
that feels right.
Interesting. Wow.
Because somebody who doesn't apologize isn't going to buy your book.
Yeah.
They don't want to.
Right.
They don't see the value. I mean, if somebody were on the fence and they were to say, let me find out more about this, mine's not the only one out there. There's some wonderful books about apology. One that's kind of focused on the legal aspects of it. Another that's really about the workplace and teams and so forth. There's really a lot of really good books about, and relationships too is kind of the other sort of big category of books about apology. But you're gonna want to read that book, and you want to read that book only because you see that something in you has to change, that this has caused a problem in your life. And I guess it's like anything else, no one's going to change their behavior that they're really entrenched in until they see the damage that it's causing and the pain that it's causing themselves as well as others, and they want to change.
Yeah, they need that burning platform to come seek it out, probably. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Do you have any of like the like, if you're going to apologize and if you're in and you're committed, here are like 2 or 3 things you just want to avoid at all costs when you're trying to apologize?
Yes. It's I'm sorry, but and really to expand that a little is don't give any excuses. I'm sorry. I was doing this and that's how come that's the same as I'm sorry, but, and it's it just dilutes the apology. It just kind of gives you, it just sort of makes it worse for the other person. The way that Rebecca finally apologizes to Ted is she doesn't make any excuses. She just names the thing that she does. And the things that she did, she names them all. She does it quickly, which is actually pretty good. If you can just sort of bottom line this, here's how I harmed you. Don't make any excuses. And here's a really important key as well. You can say, I feel bad, but don't belabor how you feel about, I feel so ashamed. I'm really sorry. I was terrible.
That's good.
Because you're turning the other person into your caretaker. And that is absolutely the wrong way to apologize. If you're going in there kind of, hoping that the flowers are going to give the message for you, there's nothing wrong with showing up with flowers, but the words are the most important thing to come first. And there's another sort of must not do, which is the longer you put it off after you recognize that you need to do it,
yes,
the harder it gets for you and the worse they're going to feel on the other end and the less sort of impact it's going to have. I mean, if think about it, if somebody says, yeah, last month when I did, it's like, yeah, where have you been? There's also something that I call, don't be confused getting caught with the offense itself, which is something along the lines of, well, this never would have happened if you hadn't been looking at my phone.
Yeah.
It's not, that's a way of reversing the blame, kind of anything that you're doing other than just sort of taking responsibility for it. I guess one other sort of easy thing to fall into is to kind of contradict them. If they didn't get something quite right, I mean, certainly you wouldn't argue with them. Sometimes in an apology, people are still a little worked up. I mean, they're not, completely disarmed. Often they are, but if you're serious about this and you're really kind of taking your time and just, you're going to take whatever they can give you. They might give you a little bit of pushback. They might remind you of something that you did. Just shut up and listen. And certainly, to contradict them, say, but no, it was a Wednesday. It wasn't a Thursday. That's not the right time. There's a really good rule of thumb, which is you deliver your message and then you shut up and, wait for them to kind of respond. And then the conversation can go from there. And it usually ends up with a hug or something along those lines where, often people just feel really seen and heard and valued when you've apologized to them because they know that it's not easy.
Yeah. And that's the goal, right? Like that's the whole point is to build the connection with the other person and to repair that if that's what's, if that's been harmed. So love that.
Good stuff. I feel like a lot of what's going on in the world could be healed if people would just apologize, take the blame, and not justify it.
Amen to that.
Right on, Jason. Yep. I think you're right about that.
Okay, Donna, one of my favorite things from the book were some of the tips that you had for things we shouldn't apologize for. That was a really nice ad. Could you tell us more about that?
Sure. Sometimes people get into the habit of apologizing too much. And there are times when you really don't need to apologize, and people do it. Sometimes it's almost like a nervous tick. So you don't have to apologize for crying. Almost everybody who starts to cry in public will say, I'm sorry.
True.
That's so true.
It's like very reflexive, but you really don't have to. Fainting, throwing up, saying no.
Oh, that's a good one.
Winning. This goes to this not very good girl growing up in the mid 20th century. Suffering an injury. So somebody steps on your foot and you say, I'm sorry. I've done that. So someone will be, trying to get past me in a movie theater. They'll step on my foot. I'll go, oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
That's apologizing too much.
Yes, that's too much. Yes.
Okay. Getting angry over an injustice. That can be tricky because really there's so many layers there. Having an opinion. I'm sorry, but I disagree with you. That's kind of the way that one shows up. Yeah. Tending to your own needs. I'm sorry, but I have to eat. It's like I'm about to faint or throw up.
Yeah.
For feeling an emotion.
Yeah, I love those. I love those. Did you notice like so many of those seem like struggles that women might struggle with more than men? Does the research back that up, Donna? Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote an article about over apologizing, and it was pretty much a woman's blog because it was how do you just sort of maintain your it's more than just your composure, but it's about your authority in a situation, in a business situation where you might be under attack, and women do have emotions and they do sometimes express them perhaps against their desires. But there's not really a need to apologize for that. But yeah, our tendency is to try and be nice and to apologize a little bit too much sometimes.
Yeah, so I think that's socialized into women in a different way than it is for men.
Yeah.
Sure. I think some people in my family wish that I would apologize for winning a little bit because I'm so obnoxious when I do win. They'd rather me be a little more Donna, that is a fantastic list. And I can't wait to share that with our listeners. And for those who have taken a listen today and they say, ooh, I want the book. I want more Donna in my life. I need to find out more about apologizing. Where can they find you, Donna?
Okay. Well, thank you for asking. So my book website is donnamoriarty.com. And I guess you can probably put that in the show notes.
Yeah, please sure will put those in the show notes.
Yeah, we sure will.
Spelling is everything. There's only one I. My second website is silversmithwriting.com. which also we can put in the show notes. Yeah. And you can find me on LinkedIn. If you type in Donna Moriarty Writer, you will not get the accountant or the one who has no identity.
Love it. Love it. Yes, you want the right Donna. You want the Donna who's a writer, not an accountant for this particular task for sure. Well, thanks again, Donna, for joining us. We appreciate you so much and really appreciate the knowledge you shared with our listeners today.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well,
thank you so much.
It was a pleasure to be with you guys. I love the podcast and I so love Ted Lasso and I can't wait till it comes back. But meanwhile, I have everything streaming and I got the podcast to listen to.
Diamond Dogs. Thanks, Donna.
All right.